not an image of the planet, not an image of the cities or the oceans or the lights that glittered across the night side of the third rock from that yellow star. The image that stopped everything was of a single object floating in low orbit, a small thing relative to the scale of space, cylindrical, inert, marked with symbols in a language the Varen translation system had not yet processed. The probe's analysis flagged it in three categories simultaneously: artificial construction, radioactive core, delivery mechanism. The Varens called the object a seed, not because it grew anything, because it was the kind of thing you buried somewhere, and then everything in the surrounding area changed permanently. They had read about such weapons in historical records of extinct civilizations. They had never seen one in orbit around an inhabited planet. They had never seen 600 of them. Yara was not a scout. She was a cartographer. She mapped stellar bodies and gravitational fields and the quiet geometry of uninhabited space. She had been in the Varen Deep Survey Division for 9 years, and in those 9 years she had never filed a report that made anyone in the collective's administrative corps put down what they were doing and call her back within the hour. This one did. She was sitting in the survey bay of the mapping vessel, going through the probe's telemetry for the 4th time, when Director Fenno appeared on her screen with an expression she had only seen on his face once before, during the Outer Reach Boundary incident, which had been the most alarming event of her career until approximately 40 minutes ago. "Tell me the count is wrong," Fenno said. "I have run it 4 times," Yara said. 612 discrete units confirmed, 43 additional signatures that may be units in a lower state of readiness. The probe's radiation sensors are reading all of them as active. Fenno was quiet. "They are in orbit," Yara said, because she needed to say it out loud again to keep believing it herself. "Around their own planet, pointed at their own surface." "And at anything approaching from outside," Fenno said. "Yes, the positioning geometry covers both." The planet below those 612 objects was called Earth by its people. The Varen survey team had named it Survey Point 14 and had expected to spend 3 weeks cataloging it before moving on to the next system. It was a standard inhabited planet assessment: mid-level technology, fragmented political structure, no detected faster-than-light capability. The kind of world the collective cataloged regularly, noted for future contact when the civilization reached a more developed stage, and filed. The file was going to be considerably more complicated than anticipated. Fenno authorized a full sensor sweep of the planet's surface and near-space environment. Yara ran it over the next 6 hours while the mapping vessel held position behind the system's outer gas giant, well outside any sensor range the planet's technology could reasonably manage. The sweep was thorough. It was also, as it returned data, increasingly difficult to process without stopping and sitting very still for a moment. The surface had military installations on every continent, not small ones. The energy signatures alone suggested infrastructure the Varen military division would classify as large-scale and sustained. There were underground structures, deep ones, built in ways the Geological Survey flagged as deliberate reinforcement against surface-level events. There were mobile units. There were naval units on the ocean surface and below it. There were aerial units, and, Yara confirmed with a level of scientific precision she was somewhat reluctant to achieve, units in the upper atmosphere specifically positioned to respond to objects entering from space. They had been watching the space above them. For how long, the survey data could not say, but the infrastructure that watched it had clearly been built with care and maintained with intention. Yara filed the preliminary report with a personal note attached, which she had never done in 9 years. The note said only, "Recommend we do not approach without significant preparation and a very clear plan for what we intend to say." The note was read by 7 senior members of the collective's expansion council within the hour. By the end of the day cycle, the survey mission had been reclassified. It was no longer a cataloging exercise. It was an assessment of something the Varen Collective had not encountered in 3,000 years of expansion. A civilization that had looked up at the sky above its own world and decided, with considerable engineering effort and at great expense, to be ready for whatever came down from it. Yara spent the night cycle going back through the probe data. She kept returning to the image of those objects in orbit, 612 of them, patient, waiting. She thought about what kind of history produced a species that looked at their own sky and built that answer to it. She thought it must have been a very long history, and a very hard one. She was not wrong. The Varen Expansion Council sent 3 people to the Earth assessment. Not soldiers, not diplomats, scientists, because scientists asked better questions before drawing conclusions, and the Council had decided very quickly that conclusions drawn too early about this particular planet could be the kind of mistake that did not offer a second attempt. Bren was a xenobiologist. Sela was a cultural analyst. Ameth was a weapons systems specialist who had spent most of his career cataloging extinct civilizations and had therefore spent most of his career looking at what was left after something went wrong. He had been included specifically because of that experience. The Council wanted someone who could look at what the humans had built and explain it without flinching. Ameth had not flinched yet, but he had been very quiet since they entered the observation position above the planet's night side, and Bren had learned in 6 years of working with him that Ameth's silence was a specific kind of communication. "Tell us," Sela said. Ameth pulled up the display. He had spent the previous day organizing the sensor data into a presentable structure, which had taken longer than it should have because every time he built a category, something from a different category needed to be in it too. The humans did not organize their dangerous things separately from their ordinary things. That was the central problem. That was the thing he had been sitting with. He started with the water. The planet's oceans covered most of its surface. The Varens had noted this as a positive indicator during the initial survey. Water-rich worlds tended toward biological abundance, and often toward civilizations that valued the ocean as a resource to be maintained. The humans did value it. They also had, at this moment, 41 vessels beneath the surface of those oceans that carried weapons capable of destroying every major city on the planet's surface. The vessels moved slowly and continuously on routes that the sensor mapping had not yet fully charted, because the routes were designed to be difficult to chart. The humans called this a deterrent. Ameth explained what deterrent meant in this context. A thing so dangerous that its existence prevented anyone from starting the sequence of events that would require its use. Sela asked how the humans ensured that the sequence never started accidentally. Ameth showed her the command structure, the layers of authorization required, the verification systems, the dead man protocols built into the systems that ensured certain outcomes if communications were severed. Sela looked at the display for a long time. They have spent considerable effort making certain that these things cannot be used carelessly. Yes, Ameth said, and considerable effort making certain that they exist at all. Yes, both at the same time. That is what I have been sitting with, Ameth said. Bren had been running a separate analysis on the biological and agricultural data, which had seemed like the gentler side of the assessment, until it had stopped seeming that way approximately halfway through. He brought his findings to the shared display. The humans had developed, over centuries, a comprehensive understanding of the biological vulnerabilities of their own species. This was partly medicine. The record of human medical achievement was extraordinary. They had eliminated diseases that had killed hundreds of millions, developed interventions that extended life significantly beyond what biology intended, built systems of care that function across the entire planet with varying degrees of effectiveness. Bren found this genuinely impressive. The same knowledge, held in the same research institutions, written by the same scientists, also constituted one of the most detailed biological weapons development foundations he had encountered in any species. Not because the scientists intended it that way, because the knowledge of how a body failed, what made cells stop functioning, what compounds disrupted which systems, was the same knowledge whether you were using it to prevent harm or cause it. The humans had built legal frameworks specifically prohibiting the use of that knowledge as a weapon. The frameworks were internationally agreed upon and widely signed. They were also, the historical record showed, periodically violated. They know, Bren said. They are aware that the knowledge is dual use. They have specifically tried to legislate against the dangerous application of it. And the knowledge exists anyway, Sela said. The knowledge exists anyway. It cannot not exist. You cannot know how to heal without knowing how to harm. They are the same information. The three of them sat with this for a moment. Ameth pulled up the next category: food production. The humans grew food at a scale sufficient to feed their entire population several times over. The agricultural chemical infrastructure required to do this was, at industrial scale, chemically adjacent to explosive manufacturing in ways the humans were well aware of and had built extensive regulatory systems around. The regulatory systems worked most of the time. Then fuel, then metals, then the civilian engineering programs whose graduates went into construction and whose skills were, as a byproduct of being excellent engineers, also applicable to fortification design, infrastructure disruption, and materials science for protective systems. It went on. Sela stopped taking notes at a certain point. She sat back and looked at the planet on the display screen. It was past the Terminator line now, moving into dawn on the eastern continent, and the light coming up over the curve of it was a color she had not seen on any other world she had assessed. "It is not that they built a weapon factory," she said slowly. "It is that their entire civilization is the factory. Everything they do in a way that has a weapons application, not because they planned it that way. Because they evolved that way," Bren said. "A species that competed with itself for resources on a single planet for hundreds of thousands of years, while simultaneously developing technology. Every tool is a weapon because every tool was developed by beings who needed it to be both." Amath nodded. He had reached this conclusion 2 days ago and had been waiting for the others to get there. "So the question," he said, "is whether that makes them dangerous to us, or whether it makes them something else." Nobody answered right away. Outside, Earth turned into its morning, completely unaware that 3 beings in a cloaked vessel above its clouds were looking down at it, and reconsidering everything they thought they had understood about what they would find here. Sela made the decision to intercept a human transmission on the 14th day. She did not consult Amath or Bren before she did it. She waited until the observation window aligned with a signal she had been watching for 2 days, a narrowband transmission between 2 human research institutions on opposite sides of the planet, and she redirected the probe's antenna array and pulled the whole thing into the translation buffer before she thought too carefully about whether she should. The transmission was a conference. 81 human scientists in a shared audio and visual network, discussing the results of a materials research project. The project involved a new alloy developed for use in deep-sea pressure vessels, the kind of structure the humans built to explore the deepest parts of their oceans. The alloy had taken 6 years to develop. It was lighter than anything currently in use and maintained structural integrity at pressures that destroyed conventional materials. Sela listened to 81 humans talk about it for 2 hours. She was not listening for the material science. She was listening to how they talked. They argued constantly, not angrily mostly, but with a persistent, energetic disagreement that never fully resolved into consensus. One scientist would present a finding, and 3 others would immediately identify problems with the methodology, the sample size, the interpretation of the data. The original scientist would defend the work. The three critics would refine their objections. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, the science got better. She could see it happening in real time, the idea being stress-tested by the people most qualified to break it. She flagged the alloy specifications and sent them to Ahmeth. He came back to her in 20 minutes. The message he sent contained no words, just the weapons analysis output the Varen system had generated from the alloy's mechanical properties. The output listed 17 military applications. The first 3 were armor classifications that exceeded anything in the Varen defense catalog. The rest were worse. Sela read it twice. Then she sent back a single question: did the humans know? Ahmeth's reply was longer this time. He had cross-referenced the alloy's specifications against human military research databases, which the probe could access through the same network the conference had been transmitted on. The alloy was not in any military database. It had not been flagged by any human defense contractor or government research program. It was a deep-sea exploration material. The 81 scientists arguing about it on that call were oceanographers and structural engineers, not weapons designers. They had spent 6 years building what the Varen weapons system had identified in 20 minutes as one of the most significant armor advances it had encountered. By accident, while trying to look at the bottom of their ocean, Bren appeared in the doorway of the analysis bay. He had heard enough of the exchange to know the shape of it. He sat down across from Sela and looked at the data she had on her screen. "This keeps happening," he said. "Every day," Sela confirmed. "Every day there is something new. A university engineering program produces a structural design for a bridge that the weapons system classifies as applicable to defensive fortification. A pharmaceutical company publishes a compound study that the medical analysis flags as dual use within 3 processing cycles. A farming equipment manufacturer releases maintenance specifications for a harvesting machine that the mechanical analysis identifies as adaptable for purposes entirely unrelated to farming. None of them know, Bren said. Some of them probably suspect, Sela said. The humans are not naive. They have dual-use research oversight committees. They have scientists who specifically study this problem, the problem of knowledge that can be applied to harm. They write papers about it. They hold conferences about it. And then the next research team publishes something that the oversight committees did not anticipate, Bren said. Because you cannot anticipate everything. The knowledge space is too large and it grows faster than the oversight. Bren was quiet for a moment. Outside the viewport, the planet was in its afternoon cycle on the continent they were currently positioned above. There were clouds building over the mountain range that ran down the western side of the large landmass. He watched them for a while. "I want to try something," he said. He went to his station and pulled up the Varen Collective's own scientific publication database. The full archive, everything the collective had produced and published in 3,000 years of civilization. He ran it through the same dual-use analysis system they had been applying to human research. The system took 11 minutes. When it returned results, the 3 of them looked at them in silence. The Varen archive had generated 42 dual-use flags across 3,000 years of scientific output. The human database from the last 40 years alone had generated over 900. Ahmeth sat down very slowly. "They are not producing weapons research faster than we are," he said carefully. "They are producing all research faster than we are. The weapons applicable output is a byproduct of the rate." "They move faster," Sela said. "Everything moves faster. The arguments, the publications, the applications, the revisions. That conference we intercepted, 81 scientists disagreeing with each other in real time. We do not work that way. We build consensus before we publish. We verify at every stage." "Which makes us more careful," Bren said. "And slower." Ahmeth said, much slower. The implication sat in the room with them without anyone stating it directly. A civilization that produced dangerous knowledge faster than any species the collective had cataloged, not because it was trying to be dangerous, but because it was trying to understand everything as fast as possible, was a civilization that would continue to advance whether the collective approached it or not, whether the collective approved of the direction or not. Sela looked at the comparison figures on the screen one more time. 42 flags in 3,000 years, 940. She sent the full report to Yara on the mapping vessel with a note that said, "We need the Council to understand that the timeline for a decision is shorter than they think. This civilization does not wait." She did not know, as she sent it, that she was understating the situation considerably. She would find out the following morning, when Ahmeth pulled the next batch of intercepted transmissions and found something in them that made the alloy discussion look small. What Ahmeth found in the intercepted transmissions the following morning was a human-child science competition. The competition was open to individuals between the ages of 14 and 18. The submissions were scientific projects, designed, conducted, and written up by the students themselves. The competition had been running for several decades. Ahmeth pulled the current year's submissions because the network packet containing the judges' preliminary scores had been large enough to catch the probe's automated flag for unusually dense information clusters. He read through the submissions for 3 hours before he called Sela and Bren in. There were 412 entries. He had sorted them by the Weapons Analysis System's output score, highest to lowest, and then he read the top 30 to his colleagues without telling them where the projects had come from or who had written them. A 14-year-old had developed a water purification method using locally sourced materials that, at scale, could also be used to selectively filter biological agents from a water supply, depending on what you chose to filter for. A 16-year-old had written a study on drone navigation algorithms for agricultural monitoring that the Varen system identified as directly applicable to autonomous targeting systems with minimal modification. A 15-year-old had investigated the structural properties of a common construction foam and found a compression response pattern that the analysis flagged as relevant to blast absorption architecture. A 17-year-old had built, in her family's garage, a small rail-based acceleration device to study electromagnetic propulsion for her physics project. The device worked. The physics write-up was correct. The scaling mathematics she included in the appendix, intended to show the theoretical upper limit of the design, described a weapons platform the Varen military catalog classified as advanced. She had included it in the appendix of a school science competition project that she had built in her garage. Bren put his head in his hands. Sela did not move for a long time. Then she said, "How old?" 17, Ahmeth said. Where did she learn the scaling mathematics? The write-up cites a publicly available physics textbook and 2 online educational resources. Sela looked at the ceiling. "I want to be precise about what we are observing," Ahmeth said, because precision was the only tool he had left that felt adequate. "We are not observing a civilization that trains its children to build weapons." The girl with the rail device was studying electromagnetic propulsion because she finds physics interesting. The drone navigation student was motivated by an interest in agricultural efficiency. They are not being directed toward weapons development. They are simply so thoroughly educated in foundational sciences, in a culture that values scientific curiosity so broadly, that weapons-applicable knowledge is an automatic byproduct of ordinary learning. At 14, Sela said. At 14, yes. Bren lifted his head. His expression had moved through several phases and settled somewhere between scientific fascination and genuine unease. Pull up the broader population data, education rates, scientific literacy metrics across the general population, not just the competition participants. Ahmeth had already run it. He put it on the shared display. The humans had achieved near-universal basic literacy across most of their population within the last century. Scientific education was compulsory through mid-adolescence in the majority of their political territories. Higher education enrollment had been growing steadily for decades. The number of humans currently enrolled in university-level science and engineering programs, at this moment, was larger than the entire population of several species the Varen Collective had successfully annexed. Sela did the multiplication in her head. Then she did it again because the first result seemed unreasonable. The number was not unreasonable. It was simply very large. "We keep looking for the weapons program," she said slowly. "We keep looking for the facility, the program, the deliberate military infrastructure that explains the output. And it does exist. We have cataloged all of it. But it is not the source." "The population is the source," Ahmeth said. 8 billion people, the majority of them receiving scientific education, a culture that celebrates discovery and invention and rewards it economically and socially. No separation between civilian and military knowledge because the knowledge cannot be separated. It is not a weapons program. It is a civilization. The three of them sat in the quiet of the observation bay. Outside, in the thin upper atmosphere below them, one of the humans' weather satellites drifted past on its orbital track. It was monitoring cloud formation and sea surface temperatures for the planet's meteorological service. Ahmeth had run its sensor specifications through the analysis system on day 3. The satellite's sensor array, repurposed, would have made an effective surveillance system for tracking ground-based military movements across a continent. It was looking at clouds. Bren finally said the thing none of them had said yet. "If we had arrived here intending to annex this planet by capability demonstration, the way we have done with every other civilization, the way the Council is assuming we will do here." He did not finish. He did not need to. Ahmeth opened a new report file. He had been composing it in his head for 2 days, revising it, trying to find the correct language for something that did not have a precedent in Varen expansion history. He had 3,000 years of documentation to draw on, and none of it described this. He started typing. The report was not going to tell the Council that Earth was dangerous. The Council already knew that. The report was going to tell them something harder, that the danger was not a program or a policy or a decision that the humans had made. It was what the humans were. And that was not a problem that a boundary or a quarantine or a capability demonstration could address. It was a problem that required a completely different kind of thinking. Ahmeth wrote for 4 hours. When he finished, he read it back once, changed 2 words and sent it. Then he went to the viewport and looked at the planet for a long time, thinking about a 17-year-old girl in a garage somewhere below him who had looked at an electromagnetic coil and asked what its upper limit was. He hoped she was studying something peaceful now. He suspected she had already moved on to the next question. The Council's response to Ahmeth's report came in 2 parts. The first part was a question. Director Fenno asked it on behalf of the full Council, and it was, Sela thought, the right question. He asked, given everything the assessment had found, given the scale of the dual-use knowledge base and the rate of production and the breadth of population-level scientific capability, was there any evidence that the humans intended to use it outward, beyond their own planet, beyond their own conflicts? Sela answered it herself because it was a cultural analysis question, and cultural analysis was her field. She had spent 3 weeks in the intercepted broadcasts looking for exactly this. She had built a model of human intent from speeches and policy documents and scientific literature. And because human culture was expressed in more than official channels, from entertainment and art and music, and the things people said to each other in the ordinary course of their lives. The answer was complicated, and she gave the council the complicated version, because simplifying it would have required leaving out the parts that mattered most. The humans wanted to go to space, badly. It was a consistent cultural aspiration that crossed political boundaries and appeared in the records of every major civilization on the planet going back to the earliest days of space-capable technology. They had put objects in orbit, on their moon, on neighboring planets. They had sent probes past the edge of their solar system. They were currently running programs to develop the capability to send people to the nearest other planet. They talked about becoming a multi-world species, as though it were an inevitability rather than a possibility. They also had, built into the governing frameworks of most of their space programs, explicit provisions against the weaponization of space. The provisions were imperfect and contested, and had been violated in minor ways. The debate about them was ongoing and loud, but the provisions existed. The majority of human space activity at this moment was science. Telescopes and probes and atmospheric monitoring and astronomical observation. They were looking outward with curiosity rather than armament. The difference between looking and reaching was not enormous. Sela said this clearly. But the looking itself, she argued, was evidence of something. A species that looked at the rest of the universe primarily with telescopes and scientific instruments was not a species in the orientation of conquest. It was a species in the orientation of wondering. And wondering, in her professional experience, led to different outcomes than wanting. The council noted this and asked the second part. The second part was not a question. It was a proposal. The council had consulted with the expansion division and produced 3 options for how to proceed. Option 1 was quarantine, establish a boundary, maintain monitoring, prevent contact, revisit the assessment in 50 years. Option 2 was a capability demonstration followed by annexation terms, the standard approach, with the acknowledgement that the risk profile of this particular case was outside standard parameters. Option 3 had never been used before in Varen expansion history. It was listed in the foundational protocols as a theoretical option, and had been included because someone, 3,000 years ago when the protocols were written, had apparently anticipated that a situation might arise which did not fit either of the first 2 approaches. Option 3 was, approach as equals, disclose the observation, present the collective honestly, offer dialogue without preconditions, without annexation terms, without capability demonstration, and without any assumption about the outcome. The council wanted the assessment team's recommendation. Ameth said option 2 would be the last thing the Varen collective ever did, and he said it plainly and without drama because he felt that plainness was warranted. A capability demonstration worked when the subject civilization's response to being outmatched was to recognize the rational choice and accept terms. It required the subject to be operating within a framework of rational self-interest. He had spent 3 weeks watching the humans, and he could say with confidence that they operated within that framework some of the time. He could also say that they had a well-documented historical pattern of responding to being outmatched not with acceptance, but with the specific kind of motivated problem-solving that emerged when the alternative to solving the problem was extinction. The dual-use knowledge base, the rate of scientific production, the 17-year-old in the garage who had looked at an electromagnetic coil and asked what its upper limit was. All of it pointed in the same direction. A capability demonstration against this species was not a deterrent. It was an invitation to a competition the collective had never trained for. Bren said he agreed with Ameth and added that option 1 had its own timeline problem. 50 years of human scientific progress, unchecked and uncontacted, would produce a situation considerably more complex than the current one. The window for a manageable first contact was not infinite. Sela said option 3 was unprecedented and therefore frightening and also, as far as she could determine, correct. The humans were not a species to be managed. They were a species to be talked to. The distinction was significant, and the collective needed to decide which kind of relationship it was capable of having. Director Fenno went offline to consult. He came back in 4 hours. The council had voted. The breakdown was not unanimous, and Fenno did not share the exact count. He shared the result. Option 3 was authorized. The assessment team was directed to identify a suitable point of contact on the surface and develop an approach protocol that minimized the risk of the contact being interpreted as threatening. Sela immediately noted the difficulty in this last requirement. Minimizing the risk of being interpreted as threatening when appearing unannounced and without warning from a cloaked vessel above a civilization that had spent considerable resources preparing for exactly that scenario was not a small challenge. Bren pointed out that the humans had a concept for this. They had entire diplomatic traditions built around the problem of approaching someone who had reason to be afraid of you. They had written extensively about it. The literature was available in the intercepted archives. He spent the next day reading it. Then he came to Sela and said he had found the approach protocol. It was not a Varen protocol. It was a human one. The principle was simple. You went to them without your defenses visible, not unarmed, because unarmed was not honest and the humans would know it, but without the defenses showing. And you let them decide what to do next. You gave them the choice. Because a species that had spent its entire history fighting for the right to make its own choices was not going to respond well to having that right removed at the first moment of contact with an outside civilization. You had to let them choose. Sela looked at the protocol outline Bren had written. Then she looked at the planet on the display screen. Then she said, "All right, let us go and talk to them." They chose a woman named Priya Sood, because she was the one who had already found them. This was not something the assessment team had anticipated. They had spent 4 days building a contact candidate profile, cross-referencing personality indicators and professional background and public communication records, looking for a human who combined the right qualities: scientific literacy, demonstrated capacity for receiving unexpected information without immediate hostile response, some evidence of thinking about the question of other civilizations, because a person who had already considered the possibility would handle the reality of it more steadily than one who had not. They had a list of 12 candidates when Bren noticed the signal. It was faint, deliberately faint, he realized, which was the part that stopped him cold. It was not a broadcast. It was a tight beam transmission in a frequency range that corresponded closely to the probe's own passive sensor emissions, which was not something any human institution had any reason to know unless they had detected the probe, analyzed its output, and built a targeted response signal. The signal contained a mathematical sequence. Simple. A prime number series, then a geometric progression, then a pause, then the same sequence repeated at a different interval. It was a pattern designed to be unmistakably artificial without conveying anything threatening. It was, Bren recognized with a feeling he did not have an immediate word for, exactly what the Varens would have sent if their positions were reversed. They traced the signal to a radio telescope installation on a high plateau in the southern part of the continent. The installation belonged to a small independent research organization. The director of the organization was a radio astronomer named Priya Sood, 51 years old, who had been scanning an unusual frequency range for the past 11 days. The same 11 days the probe had been in the outer system. She had found them before they found her. Sela changed the contact candidate list to one name. The approach was made at dawn local time, because Bren's reading of human diplomatic literature had identified dawn as a time the humans associated with new beginnings, which seemed appropriate. The observation craft decloaked in the airspace above the plateau and descended toward the installation slowly and visibly, because the whole point was to be seen clearly and let Priya Sood decide what to do with that. She was standing outside when they landed. She had a jacket on against the cold and a thermos in one hand, and she was watching them come down with an expression that Sela, analyzing it from the viewport, identified as the particular look of someone whose hypothesis has just been confirmed. Not fear, confirmation. They came out of the craft one at a time. Ameth had argued for bringing a translator device and nothing else. No data slates, no recording equipment visible, nothing that read as surveillance, given that surveillance was exactly what they had been doing for 5 weeks, and disclosure of that fact was going to be a significant moment in this conversation. Priya Sood looked at the three of them in the early light. "You have been here for a while," she said. The translator rendered it cleanly. Sela stepped forward. 5 weeks, she said. "We apologize for the observation period without disclosure. We needed to understand what we were encountering before we made contact." Priya was quiet for a moment. She looked at them with the careful attention of someone filing a great deal of information very quickly. "And what did you conclude?" "That the standard approach to first contact that our civilization uses would have been a significant mistake in this case." Something shifted in Priya's expression, the standard approach being demonstration of superior capability, followed by an offer of terms. Priya looked at them for a long moment. Then she said, "That would have gone badly." "We determined the same," Sela said. "Good." Priya held up the thermos. "I have been standing out here for 3 hours. Come inside. I will make more coffee and you can tell me everything." The conversation that followed lasted 2 days. Not 2 hours. 2 full days, with Priya sleeping 4 hours in the middle of the first night, and returning with more coffee and a notepad she filled from front to back in handwriting that Sela's translation device struggled with because Priya wrote faster than she spoke. She asked about the orbital weapons analysis. She asked about the dual-use research findings. She asked about the child science competition, which produced the longest silence of the 2 days, because when Sela explained that a 17-year-old's electromagnetic project had generated a weapons classification that exceeded Varen military capability benchmarks, Priya sat very still and then said, "Which one?" Sela showed her the file. Priya read the name. She nodded slowly. "She just got accepted to a physics doctoral program. I have read her work." She paused. "Did you understand why she included the scaling mathematics?" "To show the theoretical upper limit of the design," Sela said. "It was in the write-up." "No," Priya said. "She included it because she had already identified the weapons application herself and she wanted it to be visible. She put it in the paper so that it was on the record, so that it could be part of the conversation rather than hidden." She looked at Sela directly. "Humans have been having that conversation for a long time. What knowledge should exist? What should be built? What should be controlled? We are not good at it, but we are not unaware of it." Bren, who had been mostly silent for 2 days because he was recording everything for his own analysis, said quietly, "That is the most important thing we have learned." On the second evening, Priya asked what came next. Sela told her the council had authorized dialogue. No terms, no annexation offer, no timeline, just a willingness to talk if the humans were willing to talk back. Priya looked out the window of the research station at the plateau in the last of the light. The radio telescope was still running. It was still scanning. Somewhere in the cosmos beyond the one civilization they had just found, the universe continued in all its dimensions. "Bring more of your people," Priya said. "I will bring more of mine. We have a lot to discuss, and I suspect we do not have as much time as either of us would like to take it slowly." Sela looked at her. "The universe is large," Priya said, "and you are not the only thing in it. I have been looking long enough to know that. I think you probably have been too." She was right. Sela did not say so immediately. She thought about Ameth's report, about the 42 flags in 3,000 years against 940, about the girl in the garage, about 612 objects in orbit over a planet of 8 billion curious, frightened, determined people who had never once stopped asking what was up there. Yes, Sela said finally, we have. Outside, the radio telescope turned slowly on its mount, still listening, the way it always had, the way the people who built it had always listened. Not with weapons ready, with questions. That, Sela thought, was where you started. That was always where you started.